It is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS AM 1160, 101.1 FM. We're on the line today with Jon Pessah. The book is Yogi, A Life Behind the Mask, and it's brought to us by Marcus & Mack, a law firm representing injured people. Jon, good morning.
Good morning, Todd. How are you today?
Wonderful. Hey, you're in New York City. You actually, what, Long Island? Is that where you are?
Long Island.
Yeah, man. So
Ground zero, as we were talking.
Oh, you have our prayers.
Thank you very much.
And
Mario Cuomo's doing a good job shepherding us through this. We don't know when it's going to end, and, we basically stay in our houses and wait to hear the all-clear signal.
Well, we've got good reading material for it anyway. This book about Yogi Berra is fabulous. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, Todd. I really appreciate that.
This is just a terrific read as you take us from his childhood and his friendship with Joe Garagiola and all the way through the rest of his life. A few years ago, I talked to Ron Guidry about his book about Yogi, and it was just a terrific read, and we sort of got an insight into Yogi and the way that he was living his latter years. But you take us into Yogi the baseball player, and I don't think Yogi the baseball player is nearly as appreciated today as he should be.
I couldn't agree with you more, Todd. I mean, Yogi the American icon is such an overwhelming thing that a Hall of Fame career does get obscured. And I mean, the man could hit from the day he stepped on a major league field, hitting home runs, knocking in a lot of runs, batting 300. The big question was whether he was going to play right field or he was going to be a catcher. And when Casey Stengel came to the Yankees in 1949, they thought Yogi was going to be the right fielder, and they brought Bill Dickey in. Dickey taught him how to catch, and by the end of spring training said, this guy's not just going to be able to be a good catcher, he's probably going to be the best catcher in the league, and he was right. And then the Yankees, 1949 to 1953, win 5 titles in a row, never done before, hasn't been done since, probably will never be done, and Yogi Berra was the best player on that team, and I don't think that's something that people remember at all. And so, we're talking about a dominant player for the first 8-9 years of career. He was, one of the two to three best players and sometimes the best player in baseball.
And when we think of Yogi, we do think of as a player of the bat, and it's incredible. But, you just mentioned it, what Bill Dickey did with him and the work that he put into it in such a short time to turn from a guy that none of the Yankee pitchers wanted to pitch to a guy that they completely trusted to guide them through a baseball game. It was just an incredible transition that Yogi made.
It really was. I mean, the first 2 years of Yogi's career, the pitchers, I mean, Yogi was lovable, especially on that team as a young kid, and brought lots of joy and levity to an otherwise dour locker room. And but they begged the manager not to catch him, because he couldn't throw runners out, he couldn't frame pitches, he couldn't call a game, he couldn't block anything in the dirt, sort of like watching Gary Sanchez now. And the last 50 games, and I love Gary, the last 50 games in 1948, he played the outfield, he was surprisingly fast, had a great arm, and he ended the season and everybody wrote that he was going to be the right fielder for the Yankees, and he was happy about that, and Yogi said he was. And then Dickey comes in with Stengel, and he starts working with him 2 hours a day in the heat of spring training in Florida. And as I said, by the end of spring training, he was predicting greatness for him, and that's exactly what he achieved. I mean, basically, the guy was a phenomenal athlete. Dickey fixed all the flaws in being a catcher. Yogi learned quickly, and after that, he was a dominant catcher in baseball.
One of the great things about the book is meeting Yogi as a young man, even as a child. He wasn't even a naturally left-handed hitter, but he didn't certainly look the part, but he was an incredible athlete, wasn't he?
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things I learned was that he was actually a right-hand. This is how good of an athlete Yogi was. He was a right-handed hitter. His brothers, all baseball prospects that the father said, no, you had to go to work instead, said, you know what, if you're going to make it to the major leagues, left-handed hitters have a great advantage. So he just turned around and batted left-handed. And he was so good at that when he was a kid, he used to hit the ball onto the top of the school. And, of course, this is the Depression, and they only had one baseball, so the kids begged him to bat out the other way because there was no building there, and he hit it over the fence, but at least they could run and chase it down.
Yes. The stories of Yogi and his growing up, of course, and becoming a real baseball prospect, there were some roadblocks, and one of the unexpected roadblocks was by a guy who was a really good evaluator of talent, a fellow by the name of Branch Rickey, who didn't think he really was all that hot a deal.
I'll tell you, it's a surprising story, and Red Schoendienst, who ended up being a Hall of Fame second baseman, told me this story when he was late in his life when he was coaching the Cardinals, that there was a tryout, thousands of kids across the state of Missouri and into Illinois who came to try out, and it came down to 8 players. 3 of them were Red Schoendienst, Joe Garagiola, and Yogi Berra. And they got to try out and against each other in front of Rickey and the scouts, and Schoendienst was pitching to Yogi, and he thought he was the best hitter he ever saw. Branch Rickey disagreed. Branch Rickey fell in love with Joe Garagiola as a catcher who was a talent, no question. But Yogi didn't look like an athlete, and Rickey tells him to his face, "Son, I'm doing this for your own good. I only think you're a AAA player at best, and we want players who can go all the way." The guy didn't make many mistakes, but that was a pretty big one.
Yeah. You take us through his early development and then his becoming an established star with the Yankees. One of the things that might surprise people, though, to know is he was a really good businessman, and he managed to really build himself almost a business empire based on just being Yogi.
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, his first manager, Bucky Harris, in 1948 predicted that Yogi was going to be the most popular Yankee ever. And he was right. I mean, he looked like he was put together by spare parts, tall upper body, short lower body, thick neck. But you know what? People really related to him. He looked like an average guy to them, and the fans fell in love with him, and he was able to parlay that into great business opportunities. And Phil Risotto, and he started a bowling alley, which ended up cashing in for about $1 million. Yoo-hoo brand soft drink, commercials, was on TV all the time. I mean, he became one of the most visible people, not just in New York, but in all of America.
Jon Pessah has written this great book, Yogi, A Life Behind the Mask, about Yogi Berra. The player and the manager, 2 different creatures. He never really got a shot, did he? They did not give him the real opportunity that he should have had as manager of the Yankees.
Yeah, I think certainly both times he managed for the Yankees, the first one was he came straight from being a player into a manager. They thought he'd be a drawing card. They thought he'd learn on the job, and they thought the Yankees were so good that anybody could manage them. Well, the Yankees were a broken-down team by then with aging stars and many injuries, and Yogi gets them to the playoffs, to the World Series, and comes within 3 runs of winning the title. But by August, the management had soured him and already decided that they were going to fire him. So he thought he was going to get a 2-year contract. Instead, he got his walking papers. And then George Steinbrenner, I mean, that was the worst time being on the Yankees and around the Yankees because George was firing people left and right, 2 and 3 managers a year. And he brings in Yogi, who is hugely popular. And I think that was one of the reasons he waited so long before he finally offered Yogi the job. And he ends up just driving him crazy, and he fires him after 16 games. In the '86 season, and that started 14 years where Yogi was estranged from the team that he loved, and he told Ron Guidry that those were the worst years of his life because when Yogi looked in the mirror, he saw pinstripes.
Yeah. Hey, we only have a couple of minutes left with Jon Pessah, but there are a couple of things I wanted to ask you about. One of those is the amount of verbal abuse Yogi took throughout his entire life, but certainly when he first came up with the Yankees, and that really continued. And for him to be able to put up with what he put up with shows he was a really special guy.
I'll tell you, that really surprised me. I mean, we all know the image of Yogi, but what really interested me was going back and seeing, all the events that shaped who he was. And when he came up, first of all, I didn't understand the discrimination against Italian Americans, so he faced a lot of heritage abuse. People would make fun of his looks. People would make fun of the way he mangled the language. And so people would make fun of his perceived lack of intelligence. And that lasted for years. And he just kind of like, his first manager said, if you show people that it bothers you, the abuse will just be worse. So he made like it rolled off the end of his back. And publicly it did. Internally, he hated it. But the amazing thing is he emerged from that as someone not resentful, but someone who loved being around people.
Yeah. And the other thing I really wanted to be sure I talked with you about was his love affair with his wife, Carmen. I remember Ron Guidry telling me about how deeply in love they were as a couple and how admired she was within not only the Yankee family, but all of baseball. That was just a really special relationship.
It really was, and it started in 1947 and continued through. One of the amazing things in my first book that Brett Butler told me that 80% of baseball players get divorced after their careers, and this is a marriage that lasted 65 years. Certainly, they're just like anybody else. They had their ups and downs, but there was one Yogiism that was just terrific. He said about his wife. He said, we have a great time together, and even when we're not together, we're together. And he just, it was something special, and she was greatly admired. That's a long life that she led in baseball. I mean, Yogi didn't get out of uniform until he was 64 years old, and it's a hard life, and they led it with aplomb.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a wonderful, wonderful read. I don't even want to call it a distraction from everything going on in the world right now because that gives it short shrift. It is really a terrific read. Jon Pessah.
I appreciate that.
Hey, this is terrific, and I'm sure that there are websites or social media that people can get in contact with you. Yes,
absolutely. Best place is probably to go to my website, JonPessah.com. There's information about the book. There's a couple of chapters to read. There's places where you can buy it, and other work I did when I was at ESPN Magazine.
Fabulous stuff. Jon, thanks for spending time with us today.
Hey, it was a pleasure, Todd. It was a pleasure, Todd.